My name is GK Raju, and I've been working on examining regulatory decision makings over time. One of the things that I'm going to do today is to give some early messages from this study that we're doing for the Every Life Foundation on expediting treatments for rare diseases in the 21st century. As we examine the rare diseases and we look at the orphan drug designations and approvals, one of the things that stands out on this chart is that both the designations and the approvals are growing over these last 4 decades since the Orphan Drug Act. And that's a great sign. It's an indication that they have increased several fold over the last 4 decades, an indication of intent, investment, and prioritization. Next slide, please. Given these designations and the approvals, what kind of expedited programs are these orphan drugs using? And what it shows here in terms of the 2 bars is that a large fraction of these orphan drugs do use the expedited programs. And in most cases, they use at least one expedited pathway, confirming again that the system and the expedited programs are being utilized for such rare diseases. Next slide, please. Now, we talked about regulatory flexibility, and Frank talked about regulatory flexibility. When you looked at the study of regulatory flexibility that Frank did, and we look at that over time, what he found was that the FDA consistently demonstrated regulatory flexibility over time. What we show in this slide is that the FDA also demonstrated regulatory flexibility across different disease areas. So the FDA has attempted and demonstrated that it is flexible in making decisions about rare diseases, and that's quite commendable, as Frank mentioned. If you were to look at these two colors in the bars of regulatory flexibility, one is administrative flexibility, which is more part of the system, or case-by-case flexibility, which is much more a discretion of the reviewer and their supervisors. You find a significant number of case-by-case flexibility, and particularly so for the rare inbound errors of metabolism. So again, the FDA has demonstrated to be able to make these decisions as individuals and as part of a review process to make an interpretation and apply their scientific judgment. Next slide, please. An important thing about the FDA is not only do they make decisions, but they have to explain their decisions. And there is a benefit risk framework that has been developed that allows them to communicate their benefit risk-based decisions. And an expectation is that they will incorporate and communicate the extent to which they are incorporating patient perspective in their decisions. Shown on the left is a diagram that shows that they are doing that when you look at it in terms of the patient experience data and the tables in their medical reviews. Examining these medical reviews over time shows that at least 90% of the time they are using and referring and including patient experience data in their reviews. In terms of the content of their inclusion, among the clinical outcomes assessments you see on the right, that the most frequent are the patient-reported outcomes. Again, evidence that patient-reported data is being included in these reviews. Often not what clear, however, is that it's not clear how this patient input is being incorporated into their benefit risk assessment and decision-making. One, this is not only about the decision, but it can be also about the communication of the decision. When you explain and review the actual medical reviews, it is not always clear how this patient perspective is incorporated into the benefit risk assessment itself and the final decision. Next slide, please. Here is a graphical depiction of the use of the accelerated approval pathway over time. And you can see on the left the HIV approvals starting early, and you can see that they plateaued out. In doing so, making a huge difference for HIV patients. And following, you can see multiple curves on the right of much more recent, since then, multiple oncological diseases where the accelerated approval pathway has been used. Again, you can see that it doesn't have to be used forever. It enables a field to go forward in many cases. HIV was explained. Similarly, you can think about the Gleevec experience with CML, where it moved forward the whole CML disease area within oncology. Next slide, please. And it's important to highlight that it's not just about that first approval. That first approval lays the foundation for a platform effect demonstrated here in this chart, where the first approval, where the surrogate marker might be quite imperfect, as Frank mentioned, but it lays the foundation for all the improvements that move a whole disease area forward. And we've seen that happen in multiple oncological disease areas. And again, in the slide, I show approvals, but it's not just about approvals and treatments, it's about lives. And that's what is a consequence that's enabled by this pathway and enabled by these decisions and these treatments. Next slide, please. If we now compare oncological disease approvals and the use of their pathway versus all others, as both Frank and Anga mentioned, they are different in many ways. You will see that on the top, the percentage of orphan drug approvals that use the pathway are close to 30%, 28% for oncological diseases. And if you consider all other non-oncological diseases, you will see that they are somewhere close to 8 or 9% of orphan drug approvals. But in summary, the oncological diseases use the AA pathway 3 to 5 times more frequently than any other diseases. So what can we learn from that? There's been a success story in HIV, the success story is in oncology. What can we learn about that that's relevant for us in the other disease areas? Next slide, please. First, let's talk about the fact that accelerated approval is the beginning of something that then gets converted. And in the previous 2 talks, we talked about conversions. When you talk about the HIV, oncological diseases, and all others, you'll see that if you look at the approvals that are at least 2 years old, because it's not fair to expect a conversion if something that is more recent, you'll see that there are 208 that are at least 2 years old. And if you look at the table, last column on the right, you will see that for HIV, 100% of them are converted. And in the case of oncology, 75% of them are converted. And all others, 75% are converted. So while you can look at the middle and say the conversion sometimes takes 3 to 4 years to reach half of them to be converted, 75% or more are converted as of now when we look at things that are at least 2 years old. So that gives us some numbers that links to what Dr. Anka was mentioned. So there are 278 approvals, 208 that are at least 2 years old, and 78% of them are converted. So this process is working, although it can be improved. We can ask and want to be converted sooner, and we can have improvements to implement this pathway. Another thing to keep in mind that there are different diseases. Oncological and HIV diseases, you can see the conversion rate when you get to 4 years are 50% or more. Others might have lower conversion rates, and you can look at it two ways. One is you can say it's taking time, but you can also say for that 4 years, you've had a chance to try out this disease based on a surrogate marker. And for many of these slowly progressing diseases, this pathway is even more important. However, we've got to learn from the other diseases to make it work for us. Next slide, please. This gives us some indication of why and how it works in the oncological diseases. If you look at the list of approved, recommended, finalized, formal surrogate markers from the FDA, and you look at the orange bars, there's two orange bars, oncology and hematological malignancies. If you just look at the total of those two orange bars and all the other orange bars, you'll see that all the other orange bars are the same as just the oncological diseases. So everybody else has the same number of surrogate markers that are acceptable in the FDA list as all of oncology. So that's one thing that tells you about their success. The second, if you look at how many of them are connected to different population types, you'll see something like the response rate, which are a huge number of population types within oncology that it's applicable to. And then you'll see ORR, the response rate, progression-free survival for the blood cancers, which is also applicable to so many different blood cancers and patient population types with blood cancers. So the general applicability beyond just that indication and that specific population type to so many more population types is another reason why it has been so successful in the oncological area. So for the same number of surrogate markers, 12, there are 85 patient populations it's applicable to for oncological and just 12 for the non-oncology. So that is an important thing that we can learn from. Next slide, please. As a last slide, I thought I would summarize 12 key messages relevant to accelerated approval based on the study that we are doing for the Every Life Foundation. One, the accelerated approval has been initially leveraged for HIV and later for oncological diseases. In both those cases, the initial approvals have been followed by a huge number of subsequent treatment options for these patients. But it's not just about these treatments. It's about their survival rates and their quality of life. There have been multiple studies on this survival rates. There have been studies on HIV that says there's 500,000 person years saved, and also oncology that is of similar order, multiple millions of person years lives saved, and that's not counting the quality of life. So huge impact. And the rate at which they use this pathway is 3 to 5 times higher for oncological diseases. There have been 275 accelerated approvals, of which 130 are for orphan drugs. Of these, 27 are for non-HIV, non-oncological diseases. So less than 10% of this 278 are non-HIV, non-oncological diseases. Among the list of surrogate markers acceptable, there's the same number for oncology versus all others. On average, each of the surrogate markers for oncological diseases is applicable 7 times as many population types as non-oncology. Beyond just HIV and oncology, the accelerated approval pathway has enabled positive health and economic outcomes. You even heard the example of the first multiple sclerosis. So it is working in other areas too, but there are opportunities to improve it in the implementation of the pathways, in the confirmation of trials, and giving potentially more teeth for the FDA to be able to withdraw a drug or make sure that these confirmation trials are done and completed. While those are tactical improvements to implement, there is, given the huge health and economic burden associated with rare diseases, the accelerated approval pathway remains a very important tool for the serious conditions with unmet need. Thank you.